Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, I recently purchased this PC for £200 here in the UK. That's roughly 230 euros or 270 US dollars at the time of this video. Now, this PC is based on a Ryzen 5 3600. It came with 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM and a pretty decent power supply. It was absolutely crying out for an upgrade because it has a GTX 960 in here. As you can see, it's a little bit dusty, but dust aside, the 960 is a little problematic. Now, I tested this separately. I stuck it in my i5 system just to see what this graphics card was capable of, and surprisingly it did okay. Titles like CS2 won't be a problem, but it was even able to run some of my more intensive games such as Battlefield 6 and Arc Raiders. That said, as part of a Ryzen 5 PC, it is a bit of a mismatch, and this PC could certainly benefit from something better, so that is what I've done. Now, this is a Radeon RX 6650 XT. It's an 8GB GPU, and I think it's a pretty decent pairing for this 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5. So if we dive deeper into the specs, this is paired with 16 gigs of 2400 MHz DDR4, so we could certainly go for faster RAM if we wanted to, and that will benefit some games. We also have a couple of SSDs in here, as well as a 1TB hard drive. Probably wouldn't recommend a hard drive in 2026. We have tried playing games on a hard drive before, but it isn't always pretty. You may experience some texture issues as well as other loading errors. So I got rid of that, formatted that, and we can sell that and get some money back. The same can be said for the 960. So I tidied everything up, replaced the thermal paste. I think a system like this is still going to make you pretty happy in 2026 if you intend to game at 1080p resolution. We also have upgrade potential here. We can upgrade to a faster AM4 CPU down the line. We can then obviously opt for a faster graphics card, but the 500 watt PSU may need a bit of an upgrade. The card I'm using today I think was the best choice for the power supply, and it's one that I think keeps things within a reasonable budget. So let's take a look at how some of my favourite games run. So I've tried to avoid using any upscaling where possible, just to give you an idea of native performance, and as you can see here, we've been playing Cyberpunk 2077 for a while now with the higher preset and high textures. This defaults the crowd density setting to medium, which I think is best for this CPU. It's still running a little warmer than I'd like. I have replaced the thermal paste. We are using the stock Ryzen cooler here, but I think a cheap aftermarket cooler wouldn't go amiss, especially if you want to try and overclock it a little bit, but we're retaining everything at stock here. I think the Ryzen 5 3600 and 6650 XT is an okay pairing, to be honest. I don't think you'd want to go much more powerful in terms of graphics card here, because in certain CPU intensive titles like Cyberpunk, for example, you may still find that the CPU is the limiting factor, especially at this resolution. That said, it is good enough for at least 60 FPS with native res. 64 was the average. In Arc Raiders, I actually started off with the medium preset, but the game was running better than I anticipated, so I turned things up to high and also implemented TSR. We are, however, running at native resolution, 100% scaling here for 82 frames per second. The 1% low itself was 60 frames per second, and the 0.1% low was 35. I noticed the occasional little dip with the frame times when moving between areas or moving in and out of buildings, so going from outside to inside may incur a little drop, but apart from that, yeah, things were absolutely fine. As I said before, we may benefit from faster RAM and more RAM as well, but going by the price of it at the moment, you may want to consider 16 gigs for any budget build, which I think is still fine for the most part, to be honest. 32 gigs is nice, but 16 is fine a lot of the time. For Battlefield 6, we're looking at 1080p with a medium preset and FSR native. We can use TAA instead of FSR for slightly more performance, but I think FSR native looks better, sharper overall, and it doesn't impact our frame rate too much. We're still getting over 60 FPS on average. As you can see here, our CPU is pretty much maxed out in terms of utilization. But then again, the GPU is also sitting between 85 and 99% depending on the scenario. So I don't think it's a bad pairing at all. And we weren't seeing any insane bottlenecks or frame rate drops. Remember, with a 3600 in your PC, we can upgrade to the 5600 if we want to. The 5700 will probably be better down the line, or maybe even a 5800 X3D, although the prices of those are just silly at the moment from what I last checked. But yeah, there is still potential to go higher in terms of performance with the AM4 platform. Long live AM4 as far as I'm concerned. Of course, you shouldn't expect any problems from Counter-Strike 2. I'm running at the high preset here with 1080p. MSAA will default to like 8x, but I turn this off for the best performance. I don't think it's necessary at all. Honestly, I don't think the high preset is really necessary, but we do have the power to do that here. Thanks to the spec, so I decided to just stick with it. After all, this is what the game defaulted to, so I thought, yeah, why not just go along with it? And we saw at least 150 frames per second. 160 was the average, and the game remained pretty smooth for the most part, apart from those times when I was getting wiped out, which is a lot of the time for me, and that's when I saw the occasional dip and drop with the frame time. Well, here we have Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, 1080p with a high preset and SMAA 2TX. I think we could have dropped things to medium, and that would have been a more sensible setting, to be honest. Or we could change a few settings to medium, or we could just implement some form of upscaling if we wanted to. Now, the high preset was still good enough for at least 60 frames per second, as you can see here, especially in and around this opening town. When we venture into the dense woodland, for example, this frame rate will drop to the high 50s, which is why I said medium may be a better bet. This is more graphically intensive, so the graphics card is putting in all the work here, really. And the CPU is sitting back at 50-60% utilization. This will increase as we make our way into busier towns and cities. But overall, yeah, it's pretty consistent performance from this combo. For GTA 5 Enhanced, we have 1080p with the high RT preset. We also have RTGI, or Ray Trace Global Illumination, switched on and set to high. This is what makes the biggest difference with the enhanced version of the game in terms of the lighting and effects on screen, so I thought it was very much worth enabling. This will enable by default with the very high RT preset, but that will mean that we see a sub 60 FPS frame rate. Helldivers 2 is back in the benchmarks here, 1080p with a high preset, nothing else changed for 80 frames per second. This may depend on the planet that you are playing on or what you're doing as to how the frame rate will be affected, but as you can see here with high, it's running pretty well, and I have no complaints with this one. It's always fairly consistent on a wide range of hardware that I test, and it looks decent too. We will end with Red Dead Redemption 2. Wasn't sure how this one was going to run, especially considering I set the textures to ultra and everything else to medium, with the geometry LOD set to max, the grass level of detail slider set to 2 out of 10, and TAA medium enabled. We saw 81 FPS overall. This will dip a little bit as we make our way into the town of Valentine, and the same applies to Saint Denis here. The extra NPCs on screen makes things a little more CPU intensive, but overall it was a pretty consistent experience and a very playable one at this resolution. But there we go. If you're thinking of putting together a Ryzen 5 system in 2026, you want to save a bit of money, then the Ryzen 5 3600 will still do a decent job, I think, for the price, especially considering it uses DDR4. But I would perhaps recommend faster DDR4 if the price isn't too ridiculous. I mean, I've got 16 gigs of 2400 megahertz here, and that is simply because it came with the system. It was fine, but yeah, faster memory will certainly benefit this AM4 CPU. As for the RX 6650 XT, this 8GB card, I still think it's doing a pretty decent job as well, and overall this pairing isn't too bad. But let me know what you think down below. Thanks as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.